All right, let's take a look at how I wrote this section by section and where I started from and where I ended. And we're gonna explore the libraries I've used, along the way. I started from the very first section, so I actually started from the start, from the beginning, and I didn't want things to be busy at first. I just wanted to introduce the sound stage, and I used the violin's legato track and a violin's long. These come from Hans Zimmer strings. The interface is just fantastic. You have all the articulations there, the one knob that can do the main functions that you want to usually have, and it's a great interface for when you are really working on something, because there's a lot of different user interfaces that are just fantastic and great, until you start really working with a good pace and you have a momentum that sometimes you lose just because of the interfaces. I think this is genius. It's just got what's necessary to have, but everything is at your fingertips, really. So this is just a violin's legato patch, and the other one is a violin's long. So what they do is this, they sound like this. I love this kind of texture of the strings. I was immediately captivated by how widescreen they sound, how versatile they are, and not too busy in terms of harmonics. They're just prepared beautifully. I think part of that is just because, probably my favorite studio for scoring was used to track these sample libraries. So, it takes quite a lot of importance for me. Then I added a percussion track that is very subtle, very easy. I used this for a sort of ambience development. And this track comes from Hans Zimmer Percussion Professional. I only worked with the genius knobs that are boom and crack, along with close, room and surround, the close, mid and far, whatever you want to call it, which the typical slider system that Spitfire Audio has, which I think just works and shouldn't be changed ever. This is just fantastic. Boom and crack, whether you keep them static or you work them around with your, MIDI controllers, are awesome. The way these two parameters combine together is just insane. It's so simple and so good. And again, it comes from the tracking. So enough compliments. This track sounds very subtle. I really like this one sample, for example. I put these through reverb, delay, and what I call glitch delay. So whenever this kind of signal gets a little bit over threshold, it gets sent to a system of bit crashing plugins that develop this sort of kind of glitchy digital environment. It's sort of a bit crashed delay into reverb, if you wanna, just give it a sort of a recipe. So after these percussion and strings, I wanted to add some texture, and I used some synthesizers. This is one, it's a drone that I called Bauhausscape. Again, it's very subtle. You hear how it's just sort of the air that is in the video footage somehow. And another one that I called Paris 9000, which is almost a synth kick. Now, along with these two, at the very end, when the score was kind of ending its draft phase, I added violin strings again from Hans Zimmer strings. And there's two effects patches. Effects number 2 had what I wanted. The second one I put through more reverb in the patch. You can see here that I jumped the reverb at around 55%. And the first one, again, in my sort of sound signature of blending acoustic with sort of like destroyed electronics, I put a bit crusher on from Studio One that is taking care of just making these strings sort of a recorded effect that goes into a glitchier kind of way. Not that much, but I'm going down to 16 bits, good old 16s. So again, you can hear my glitch delay at work. Like there's these bursts of air in the reverb, and then there's these data bytes that are hitting you. This is really digital data to me. I don't know why I call it that way, but it's just great. So altogether, this session gives the listener the entrance into the score itself, right? So we're starting at the very lowest of the dynamics. Right? And then we enter part 2. And in this second section, I was like, this was super, super good. I started off with the violas. So the violas are short, and these are just spiccato, you would call them maybe, but it's just a short, you know, in terms, you see that a lot in Spitfire audio libraries, like long, short, like very easy to understand. I obviously played with the mod wheel here as well. It just reacts so wonderfully to the way these musicians play, but you can also use your velocity to dictate how to play it. And I'm gonna have you listen to a part where what I had was just me playing velocities, and it just developed into the dynamics that an orchestra would have. So again, this is all completely played, even if it's, you know, parts that violins would play kind of easily compared to the piano. And the other patch is cellos short. So the cellos have pretty much the same behavior, but obviously they're tracked, you know, in different area of the room. I really love tree. I haven't played with closed tree ambience. I just went on with the default patches sometimes and just made minor adjustments or inserted a delay or a reverb where I needed. The cellos and the violas together sound like this. And we're going to take a look at the part 2B in a second. So the other stuff I've added here is not that much. We keep going with the percussion effects, the Paris 9000 synth, the dronescape. The dronescape becomes just a little bit busier. Oh, maybe no, it does it in the part 2B. So I used the synth textures to take the dialogue from part 1 to part 2. And the strings are actually changing. So we had the two violin sections playing together. Now we're sort of like erasing that sound palette, and we're bringing in the sound of the violas and cellos, but they're not playing together with the violins. We're just having the other sort of, I would say 40%, because the basses are still missing, right? Part 2B is where things become really interesting, and they really highlight how I was able to just achieve dynamics with my fingers, you know, just with the velocity, a little bit of the mod wheel, but it's mostly velocity here. So the violas leave, the cellos keep playing, these sort of a half-step moving part, and the violins join in. So it's an interval thing, really nice, and then I've added some percussions with another patch. This is perc 1. It's the same patch, but it's using a different ratio between boom and crack, so they sound different. Then there's a M1 layering, so there's a synth part that I added, and the Paris 9000 and the drone part keep connecting part 1 with 2A and 2B. So let's listen to the strings first. There's, as I said, violins and cellos. And this ends into part 3, probably, which is like the big climax. So I literally played this. This is still in draft 3, what I call draft 3, what I would send the production team to, you know, hear from them and know if that's all right. And it's just, I completely played this out of sheer inspiration. There's no thinking, mouse doing. I was like, it developed in my hands because I had this idea of having them play in intervals close to those, that minor second part with the, you know, major seventh thing. So it just came out because the parts are so well intersecting together, if that makes any sense. I added percussions to this. And what is here is a lot of reverb. So what you can hear in this part is really the percussion part with a lot more air brought into one of the longest reverbs ever, because I just do that. I'm sorry, I just love long reverbs. And then M1 layering is a pad sound. And this has my sort of signature glitch delay part, right? As you can hear. Paris 9000 keeps playing, the Dronescape keeps playing as well, and there's still violins effects 2 with deep reverb, that's how I name them, that are connecting part 2 with 2B. So you see there's always something that carries on, carries over, and brings what was into the next part, and there's new things coming in. But here it was so spontaneous that I really played everything together, and it became, you know, part 2B, which is really where we're throwing, you know, the climax of part 3. Right? And this part comes with the introduction of pretty much a lot of the stuff that was playing here. So what I like about this section is we have timpani, we have drums, we have more synths. It's just cool. And I brought into a lot of synths from, you know, my way of playing arpeggiators and stuff, and I think how they blend is just fantastic. The centerpiece of the whole mix, if I had to sort of like find it, this centerpiece, is really the drums track. So first and foremost, let's take a look at how the strings sound, just for part 3. All of the strings, there's violins, short, with the violas in short, there's now double basses playing, and there's, the cellos are actually playing, yes, in short, so everybody's pretty much busy but not playing long notes. So here's the strings. And the cellos just sustain. So last but not least, the double basses. Now for double basses, I'm usually very exigent because I want the low frequency content to be there and kind of complement what I have in the synthesizers land. And here I use the short articulation, and I didn't use my mod wheel. But what I want to underline is that by having close and tree together, I was able to bring in a little bit more grit, just enough. And it's really the velocity that I used while playing, there's no mouse fiddling, that made the double bass spiccato so energetic, even if there's no modulation wheel movement. So let's hear them. It's just fantastic how the things intersect together. It's just like great blending. Now the percussions, I brought in percussion 1, which we heard, but there's one super cool thing from the percussion library. Here, I blended a track from the same library, so it's always Hans Zimmer Percussion Professional, but I changed, take a look at this, I duplicated the part and I recreated a part that is called Percussion 2 BAM. And if you look at it, the boom and crack are different. That's all that there is to it. So percussion 2 sounds like this. And percussion 2 BAM sounds like this. And this is really what's making the percussions together sound a lot, bigger. right? Because of these boom and crack settings that interact together. I really, really like this. Then there's a Percussion 3, which I don't remember what's playing. Oh, it's playing just the ending parts to connect with the coda. All right, so this is still one of the patches, the same sound we've heard somewhere else, but there's this delay that's ping-ponging around. Then timpanis. I like rods on timpanis, so that's what I did. I had no, no script, so I just went for what I like. Timpani rods from the timpani section of the Percussion Professional Library. It's just got that movie-like attitude without being too heavy, too classical. I'm personally, in love with this kind of angle to see these percussions. Very modern, very light for being that powerful. But then I loaded in a patch that's from the rolls here, still rods, but rolls, and I used the mod wheel to just surf through the part 3 and give it sort of a vibe in terms of sustain. So if you sum this with the timpanis, with the percussions, everything that has sort of skins and, attitude and transience sounds like this. Right? And you can almost tell the song itself, like the harmony and where it's going, because, percussions are tuned and are tuned right. So if we bring the strings in, this is how they sound together. And I love this. Now, what I did was I knew I wanted drums, and I'm in love with, I had heard this library already before, and the Hans Zimmer drums is just the idea of bringing a drum kit into a sort of an orchestral sound. They nailed the sound of this drum kit. How did I write these? Well, first I wrote it, with my hands all together, but then I split things because I wanted to have a bit more control, and I don't use multi-channel contacts and stuff. I just go with one track, one sound, and then if need be, I just duplicate stuff. So the first one is pretty much kick and I think maybe a couple cymbals, but it should be mostly kick. Right? And it's just beautiful. Here you see there's pitch, boom, and crack again, and there's a stereo and a mix faders. With these 5 controls, I guarantee you have like the most amazing time writing drums, which is personally a feature that I like. I can't always do it because a lot of times I want, or maybe my audio supervisors want electronic drums because of the vibe, especially in video games music, but I'm gonna do everything in my power to bring more drums into the soundtracks I write. So then I added a snare. Now, why did I want to have a track with a different snare? Like, why? I could have, written the snare into the kick part. Well, I treated this slightly differently. And if you take a look at this track, the snare versus the kick, you're gonna notice that boom and crack are actually at 0, while the other ones are a little bit, just a little bit different. And then there's a difference in the stereo mix versus the mix. And the 2 faders are not exactly the same. So this is a way to just tailor the same drum kit, in terms of I wanted the snare just a little bit different. And it wasn't fitting the image that much, and I could have been better, and I didn't reach for compressors or other things, I just moved the libraries there. So this is how they sound together, kick and snare. Let's actually add the cymbals, which is cymbals and hats together. right? So doing it this way, I was able to take the cymbals to, the perfect velocity, but also treat it differently. For example, I added some delay on the cymbals. I like it to just extend them artificially instead of adding reverb or, playing them more. It's something I always do, but there's a secret to one track that I called the BAM track for the snare. So what it contains here is actually kick, snare, and the ending part with one cymbal hit, and it's tuned -24 semitones down, and it's got a different boom and crack, and the stereo faders and mix faders I think are pretty much the same as the kick track, but what it sounds like is this. So this has a delay on top, of course, and the post-apocalyptic vibe that this has is just my personal, favorite area of ingredients into my soundtracks. So I did this without special effects, except for the delay, which is just a normal ping pong delay, but it's the meat and potatoes that are into the actual library that with boom and crack became this sort of overwhelming post-apocalyptic atmosphere. So let's listen to the whole drum kit, and I'm gonna bring in the BAM part afterwards. Right? Everything becomes a little bit more energetic, the time subdivision is more interesting, and it just works better. But I wanted the snare to be a little bit more powerful, or actually a little more powerful, but there was something underneath that I wanted to sustain to act as a pillow for the snare. So I duplicated the snare track and I called this snare low. So it is -24 semitones, kind of a different vibe, and it has a compressor on from Studio One, and this snare now sounds just the low part like this. With the original snare and the kick just for, contrast and reference. And without. So nothing wrong with it, but in the context of things, you're gonna hear that this just sounds overwhelmingly cool. In fact, I'm gonna add the strings just because it's epic to hear drums and the string section together. How different can they be, but are they? So this covers the drums, the percussions with timpani, and the strings. Now, in my personal view of sort of like the music I write, there must be synthesizers. So this could work. I mean, percussions work with the strings, strings work with the drums, drums with percussion. So what I wanted to do, I'm briefly gonna see how things could become more me, in terms of sound signature. So I added a bass synth wobble, that's how I called it. And this is my soundscape. This is by definition, what gives the listener the idea of how far the background is, right? Then I added a bass they called Synth Raider. I have no idea where these names come from. Right? Then I added a pad that's called Nowhere. And this is a little bit more vintage that I like in terms of what kind of synths I use, but who am I fooling? Like, I love these kind of patches. And because of the water thing, I don't know, it just worked with the footage. and it just gave everything an idea of how things could move. Right, then there's another sound. It's a plucked lead sound, curiously called CP something. And I just love these type of leads to define the sort of pulsating vibe that it's going on. I don't know, I've been using this kind of stuff since forever. And then the M1 layering keeps going. And it's used more for transitions with this glitch delay that you're hearing behind. Again, this is air, and because of the foamy aspect of the waterfalls, I think it kind of blends well. It blends well as well with smoke and kind of dark atmospheres in the future and things like that. Then there's the main feature is this Prophet 5 arced, which is behind here and you can't see it, but you know, it's Prophet. And you're gonna hear why it's a Prophet 5 arpeggiated. Super long reverb, I know, and it's just what I do. I just love to arpeggiate chords. I'm sorry if you don't, but it's just me. So the whole synth section will sound like this together in part 3, which is like the climax.